Hello, can you go do this after this? My name is I'll be hosting the conversation today. Just a brief introduction before we start. Okay. Hello, everyone. Can we just do a brief round of introductions before we get started? Admin, I just wanted to check also if when will you go live?
We are live. We are live already. But while we are waiting for other people, we can just start with the introductions while we're still waiting for other people to join.
Okay. Not a problem. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Siabdela Tonono. Today I'll be your host for today. We're going to be looking at the legacy of Sobukwe, touching on some very interesting conversations about the man, his life, and his legacy. One of the things that makes us bring this conversation is that today marks the day in which we remember his death, in the sense that Sobukwe died on this day. And so in light of that, we commemorate that and remember his legacy. But also, February is generally known as Black History Month. Now, Black History Month is a month which has its origins in America, in the USA, where the month has always been set aside for the remembrance of Black history. And how we are here celebrating and remembering the lives of one of our great statesmen, Prof, as he was affectionately known to many people. We've got a great lineup of guests today whom I would like each guest to introduce themselves before we continue today. So, Mpisi, can I start with you?
All right. Sibonge Mhlonishwa, Bawutonono, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so Sibonge, son of the land, Bawutonon, Ngusompisi, I'm a child of Mangaliso Sobukwe. Thank you.
Sis Ngobi, can you also just briefly introduce yourself? Ngolobi, sorry. Okay. Can anyone just introduce themselves while we get ready? Because I assume some of us are struggling with the technology before we get started. Just pictures in the background, just difficult to get. Before we just a reflect moment there, and after we'll continue with our program. And who continues to be with us and is within our midst. We thank you for this moment. We thank you that we can be able to gather in this manner in the midst of trying times. We thank you that you have given us that grace. And we ask that as we begin this moment, can you give us the minds and the intellect that will enable us to grasp what it is that you're calling us to do in this day and age. This we ask in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. As I said earlier on today, we've got a very packed lineup of guests. Today, we'll bring a various rich expertise on the life of Sobukwe from their various spaces of interactions. And we'll start off today with Mr. Petani Madzibandila, just to give us a sense of what he understands, give us his introductory remarks about Sobukwe and his legacy on education. And once again, I would like to also take this time to congratulate you, Petani, on your recent publication. Congratulations. Over to you, sir. Petani.
Oh yeah, okay. I've just unmuted myself. I was still muted. As I was still saying, thank you for welcoming me and the wonderful kind words. But as we have already started, and some comrades have already spoken their position on Sobukwe, but mine and my contribution will be around the continual erasure of Sobukwe in the historiography and the political landscape of South Africa. But we should not be surprised at all that Sobukwe is not spoken about or is not spoken about in the historiography of the politics in South Africa, because the politics that he represents are completely opposite, and they did not even have any form of resonance with the post-1994 South Africa. And we find a state in which there has been serious compromises and continual reversal of the kind of politics that Sobukwe stood for. And clearly this politics spoke about the question of non-racialism, where in post-1994 South Africa, you see that we have a multiracial country. And besides that, we also find that the most important and the basic reason why the struggle was fought was on the basis of the fact that our land has been dispossessed, and we find no reason at all, or we find no truthfulness in the politics of saying that our land belongs to all who live in it, black and white. That cannot be possible, because the first and basic sin in this country since 1652 and the arrival of white people here have been the dispossession of land of the African people. And when the Freedom Charter was introduced in 1955, what was really the truth was that 93% of the land has been dispossessed of the African people, and with such in mind, you cannot then go in 1955 and say that the land belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And in 1955, who had the land? I mean, why our land belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And those are the kind of politics that Sobukwe did not find congruency with, and that's why the Africans actually had to break away from the ANC in protection of the 1949 program of action, which unequivocally stated that the struggle, or the only struggle that can be led or could be fulfilled is through only the African people. So we could not possibly have white people involved or leading our struggle, whereas were not willing to give up their material conditions or the material positions that they had over the question of the land. That, well, in actual fact, they had the land, which was 93% at the time. And then they go around saying that we have reconciled and our land belongs to all who live in black and white. So that could not make sense. And that could not be a position which the Africanists agreed to. So in post-1994 South Africa, those kind of imaginations or those kind of compromises which have been propagated by the ANC find expression in the form of the Constitution, and especially Section 25 of the Constitution, which protects private property. In truthfulness, what we are saying is that we cannot find no congruency between this kind of politics, where the politics of post-1990 South Africa, where the land has been compromised and not been given back to the African people, and you will say that, okay, we find congruency in this kind of politics, and we agree with the fact that the African people have reconciled in the bogus Truth and Reconciliation Commission of 1996 and said that we have reconciled and everything is fine. The land belongs to all who live in black and white, whereas the primary contradiction of which the Xhosa people waged 100 years of frontier wars protecting the land that belongs to the African people, and then you come into a compromise which says that our land belongs to all who live in black and white. So that's the kind of politics, or that's the kind of political imagination in the future that Robert Sobukwe stood for, and that has been completely betrayed by betrayed by the African people.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, sir, what you are saying is that the fundamental basis of current South Africa and the disposition and the space in which we find ourselves in South Africa is anchored on a false premise of actually saying that the land belongs to all and the Freedom Charter as a whole. So what you're actually saying is that if we are to remember, so any remembrance of some of land, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, yeah. So that's
partly to give a bit of context to this conversation. One will remember that Sobukwe was originally a member of the ANC. And in about the late 1940s, one of the issues that kind of created schisms within the ANC was that there was a group known within the ANC as the Charterists, and another group, and that group was pretty much for the idea of the Freedom Charter and backed that idea, while Sobukwe and others were more in line of the view that no, Africa is for Africans, and therefore the struggle of Africans must be waged by Africans and must be led by Africans. And so one of the key issues in that conversation was about who owns South Africa, and the Africanists felt of the view that land is a central issue here. The central issue of South African dispossession has always been about land, and therefore South Africa cannot belong to all who live in it, but is primarily a space for those who were born here and those who are Black, who have been dispossessed of the land. Petani, I'll give over to you just to give me some reflection on your conversation.
Well, as you have already explained just now, that the contradictions between the Africanist group and the Charterist group were primarily on the basis that they did not agree that our land could possibly belong to all who live in it, those who are Black and those who are white, right? And in that sense, it is trying to get to the end goal of the struggle, in the sense that the ANC wants to kind of create a sense of harmony between the European people who find themselves already in Africa and the African people who were dispossessed. So you could not possibly say that at the time, the sort of harmony or the sorts of peace that we can create is by saying that well, our land can belong to all who live in Black and white. That's the end goal. So in the dialectic sense, as Sobukwe had put it, is that he said that we are all one race. We belong to the human race, right? But that is the end goal. The end goal is for us to be belonging to the race, which is the human race. And essentially, what he is saying is that race is a social construct, it does not exist. But racism and the effects of racism are real, and they are felt by the African people. So without resolving those effects which are felt by the African people about racism, we cannot literally speak about South Africa, our land belonging to all who live in Black and white. And as Raboroko says in the manifesto of the Africanist or the Africanist case, is that there is no social philosophy in Africa or in South Africa that can be employed and that can completely gloss over the real issue of the land. And that has been the social contract of post-1994 South Africa, where there has been serious and heavy compromises on the question of the land. And that, as we have seen, that you can only lie to the people for as much as you can. And sooner or later, the people are going to revolt. The people are going to realize that, no, we have been scammed, or we have been sold a farce, or we have been given false promises. And for us to be unable, or for us to be to redo or to redress the ills of the past, we must face the honest truth and the politics of truth. And that we can only achieve through understanding the facts that the primary reason of our struggle as of 1510, or the arrival of the European settlers in our countries, that there's been a continual dispossession of the land. And the process of land dispossession did not abate in 1994. We should not make a mistake of that. I mean, we can clearly just look into the struggles which are happening currently at Kolobeni, that there is still a continual sublime process of dispossessing the African people of their land. And this we see through legislation and so-called post-1994 South Africa that continues to favor the white ruling class and the capitalist class that continue to dispossess our people. And if Sobukwe was alive today, I mean, these are the kind of politics that he sacrificed his life for. As we know, he was a lecturer. He was a lecturer at the University of Witwatersrand. He wouldn't have all that. He will just continue to have lived a comfortable middle class life. But he gave that all up in the interests of the African people and the struggle of the African people. And I think that's where we must draw our strength and courage from, despite the heavy setbacks that we see in the Africanist bloc and our Black consciousness movements in South Africa. What continues to be the dominating ideology or the dominating thinking is the Charterist thinking. And for us to be able to get to a point where we are able to contest this kind of dominant ideas or dominant thought process in our society, we need to reimagine and look into the kind of struggles that Sobukwe died for. And when we look into the struggles, we must not look into Sobukwe in isolation. As Sobukwe says in the address that he delivered in 1958, if not 59, I'm not mistaken, in the formation of the BCP of Botswana, where he spoke about the fact that the struggles that they have inherited are the struggles which were fought by Dingaan, are the struggles which were fought by Mosheshe, are the struggles which were fought by Tleshwayo, are the struggles which were fought by King Makado, and are the struggles which were fought by Bambata in 1906. And the struggles that we inherit in today's time is the struggles which Sobukwe fought and the people that came before Sobukwe. And it becomes very much important to understand that at no point in history have the African people sat in collective dismay and completely agreed that we have been defeated by the powers that are there of white people and the European settlers. There have always been a point in time in history where we have revolted. And even though our revolt currently, we might not see where it is leading us, but at the end of it, the end goal is for us to see our people liberated. I think I will stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Betani. Sompisi, I want to bring you in on this conversation, and I want to bring this conversation in. I want to bring you in on this conversation using that very famous quote that Sobukwe did. I think it was at a graduation ceremony in Fort Hare. I'm not sure of the name of the year, and where in one, I think the highlight of that quote says, "Education for us is but service to the nation." And I want to ask, as you give us your sort of thoughts about the legacy of Sobukwe, I want you to also kind of briefly reflect on, given the fact that much of higher education, and if we look at that speech in its context, Sobukwe was addressing graduates from the University of Fort Hare. And he was warning them about what education does. And one of the warnings what he was making is that if your education does not serve your community and your people, that education is somewhat useless. And therefore, the fact that he makes the assertion, or he makes the warning, kind of illustrates the nature of the kind of education that we get at higher education that tend to breed thinkers who are aloof and who live in ivory towers of the university, who are divorced from the issues of the struggle. And I want to ask the question that, is such an education perhaps valuable for Black people? An education that isolates us from ourselves and our cognitive selves and makes us somewhat feel superior when we are the sort of the elitist Blacks who are not like the rest of them, as it were. And so as you give us your introductory remarks about the life and the legacy of Sobukwe in education, it's something that I would like for you to just glance upon. And over to you, sir.
Hey, Babutonon, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir. Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, I'm clear. Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Also, thank you for your introduction. And also thank you for the very insightful historical context that was painted by Warrior Petani. It was very useful, especially for my presentation. I just quickly need to get clarity. Am I doing introductory remarks, or is this, or should I do my presentation in full?
Do your presentation in full, sir.
Okay, thanks so much. I just wanted to be clear. No, thanks so much. Let me just start by saying, first and foremost, I express my gratitude for the opportunity to the Wesley Guild South Africa for thinking that I am worthy, you know, of an audience such as this on the 43rd anniversary of the mysterious passing of Ubaba uMangaliso Sobukwe uhlathi ulisa uJambase. And many of us believe that he was killed systematically, and it is something we must talk about and reopen the inquest into his death. We don't believe the version that we were given. That's the first thing. The second thing is in the run-up to this important commemorative conversation we are having, I and a group of other brothers and sisters I work with took an opportunity to go and visit the house where Ubaba uMangaliso Sobukwe spent the last 9 years of his life. Number 6, Naledi Street in Khakose Khaleshewe, which happens to be my hometown. So we went to the house today, and we did a pilgrimage with a view to retrace the steps of Ubaba uMangaliso Sobukwe, but also to reconnect with his spirit. But also, we also had an opportunity to sit on the lap of Umama Ujoyce Makhele, who was one of the people who cooked for Ubaba uMangaliso Sobukwe and did all sorts of things, also supplied him with newspapers because she was a shopkeeper at the time. I'm mentioning this because a lot of what we uncovered during the visit to the house earlier today and during the visit to Mamu Joyce Makhele yesterday, a lot of what we uncovered, we realized that there's a lot that is still not known about the work, the life, and the greatness of Ubaba uMangaliso Sobukwe. And I'm making this point with the view that we should encourage all of those, including the Wesley Guild, that if an opportunity presents itself, we should find a way of arranging for you to go and visit the house, but also the Methodist Church, right, where he was a congregant, and hear the wonderful stories of how he carried himself at the Methodist Church. And I'm hoping that I will get an opportunity, probably during the Q&A, to share with you some of the most fascinating things that we experienced there. So in about 10 minutes or so, I will just speak to 3 issues like you have directed, Mafrika Tonono. I will reflect on that speech that Ubaba Sobukwe delivered 72 years ago as SRC president at the university known as Fort Hare. Then I will speak to the second point, which is Western education as part of the project of European imperialism. And then I will conclude by looking at what we can do to advance the legacy of Ubaba Sobukwe. Now, like you correctly said, this speech was delivered in 1949, 21st October, in his capacity as SRC president, right? And this speech, it was used even in your poster, which you used to advertise this event. Now, he delivered this speech at age 24 because he was going to turn 25 on the 5th of December that year. So at the time, he was still 24 years old when he delivered the speech, that is in 1949. Now, I'm gonna take extracts from that speech, and then I'm gonna use those extracts as an anchor to my next points, which relate to Western education as an instrument of European imperialism, and the last point, which is what we must do to advance the legacy of Uba Uhlati, right? So these are some of the extracts which I wish to share from that speech, which I'm going to speak to indirectly, right? Robert Sobukwe says in this speech, if the intention of the trustees of this college referring to Fort Hare, is to make an African college or university, as I've been informed, it is then that the Department of African Studies must be more highly and more developed. Fort Hare must become the Center of African Studies, right? Which students in African studies should come from all of Africa. He goes on to say, after the college has been in existence for 30 years, the ratio of European to African staff is 4:1. And we are told that in 10 years' time, we might come to an independent university. Are we to understand that an African university predominantly guided by European thought and strongly influenced by European staff? He asks the question. He goes on to say, I said last year that Fort Hare must be to the African what Stellenbosch University is to the Afrikaner, right? It must be the barometer of African thought. It is an interest to note that the theory of apartheid, which is today the dominating ideology of the state that was worked out by Stellenbosch, by Dr. W.M.M.J. Esalen and his colleagues, that the same Esalen is today the Secretary of Native Affairs. But the important thing is that Stellenbosch is not only the expression of Afrikaner thought, right? And the feeling, but it is also the embodiment of their aspirations. He goes on. So also, must Fort Hare express and lead African thought? The college has remained mute on matters deeply affecting the Africans because we learn it feared to annoy the nationalist government. What the college fails to realize is that, rightly or wrongly, the National Party, the National Party believes that Fort Hare staff is predominantly members of the United Party. That is the other party that was mainly of British orientation. So he goes on to say, whether we remain mute or not, right? The government will continue to be hostile towards us. So much for the college. Then he also says, a word to those who are remaining. You have seen by now what education means to us, the identification of ourselves with the masses. Education to us means service to Africa. You have a mission. We all have a mission to build, we have, right? A God to glorify, a contribution clear to make towards the blessing of mankind. We must be the embodiment of our people's aspirations. And all we are required to do is to show the light, and the masses will find their way. Watch our movement keenly. And if you see any signs of broad-mindedness or reasonableness in us, or if you hear us talk of practical experience as a modifier of men's views, denounce us as traitors, right? I want to take the last part where he says, we will watch you too. We have been reminded time and time and again that fellows who, while at college, were radicals, as soon as they got outside, became spineless stooges and screeching megaphones of white Herrenvolkism, or else become disgruntled and delusion objects of pity. Now, I shared that speech and those particular extracts with a view to make a number of points. And one of those is that to make us understand that at age 24, Ubaba Mangaliso Sobukwe did not just understand the agenda of European imperialism and what it sought to turn Africans into, right? Cognitive infantiles, but he also understood the importance of the decolonization project at the time. So even though you don't hear the words decolonization in this speech, but if you study the text of that speech, it is essentially making a case for decolonization. On my second point, Western education as part of the project of European imperialism. In the context of the world that we live in, education is generally understood to be a process of structured to facilitate things like learning, the acquisition of knowledge, the installation of morals, beliefs, values, etc., but also skills, right? So some of the methods of delivering this, as you know, as we have come to know conventionally, it's through training, teaching, storytelling, discussion, research, etc. Those are some of the methodological tools, you know, through which education is delivered. Now, as part of the project of European imperialism, after the Europeans have subdued Africans, the natives, and had dispossessed them of their land, the Europeans created colonies, which we today call countries, right? All of these cubicles, South Africa included, that we continue to refer to as countries, are nothing else but colonies of Europe's, and others are colonies of the Arabs. These colonies were a manifestation of the values, beliefs, morals of the Europeans, and not those of the natives. One of the primary means by which the dominance of the European invaders was maintained was through the colonial education system. Some of the characteristics of this colonial education system were the following. Europe and the West were the centers of all human thought and scientific endeavor. The idea being that for the African student to know more about Plato, Socrates, Kant, Hegel, and Marx, but for the African student to know nothing about great African scholars like Imhotep, Plahotep, Keti, Kunanub, Duaf, Amenenet, or even Ahmed Baba. European languages were the languages of sophisticated thought and inquiry. And this is why today competency in English continues to be regarded as a mark of sophistication or higher intellect. Any form of thought or knowledge, right, must first be validated against Western forms of thought or knowledge in order for that forms of knowledge or thought to be regarded as valid. Therefore, to be regarded as valid, authentic, scientific, African ways of knowing that precede the existence of the West by millennia have had to be accredited by the Western system of accreditation in order for them to be deemed as valid. This is because looked through the prism of the West, right, Africans are viewed as cognitive infantiles. Africans who have acquired Western education are regarded as sophisticated or having a higher intellect, right, than those Africans who have not acquired Western education. And then those Africans who have acquired Western education, right, are also trained not to associate with those Africans who have not acquired Western education, and they are trained to look down on them and call them all sorts of derogatory names. In a nutshell, the primary object of Western education is to ensure that Africans continue to be the cognitive captives of the Europeans. That is to say, Africans must continue to remain cognitive infantiles. My last point, what must we do to advance the legacy of Ubauhlati, Umangaliso Sobukwe? Judging from the issues that Ubau Sobukwe raised at age 24, 72 years ago, in his speech as SRC president, it becomes clear, as I said earlier, right, that Ubau Sobukwe fully understood the agenda of European imperialism and what it sought to turn Africans into what I call cognitive captives or cognitive infantiles. For this reason, in this speech, Sobukwe essentially called for us as Africans to become cognitive rebels who are going to strive for what I call cognitive sovereignty, right? Which he refers to in the same speech as the right to call our souls our own. Some of the practical things that we can do are the following. We must continue to have well-organized commemorative events in honor of Ubau Sobukwe and others. We must make sure that the material on him and his ideas is easily accessible to as many young people as possible. We must build or use existing institutions we control to teach African young people the thought of Babu Sobukwe. I'm hoping we will one day have a situation where we can have something like a Mangaliso Sobukwe Center for African Thought and Practice. That is one of the things I wish we can work towards. We must make sure we continue, right, with the agenda of revolutionary Pan-Africanist resistance, whose objective is the total liberation of African people wherever they find themselves in the world. Lastly, any race that depends on another for its education, employment, food, and security is a race of slaves, a race whose very destiny is in the hands of another. Such a race cannot claim to be free, independent, or sovereign. The life and the example of Ubabu Mangaliso Sobukwe implores us, compels us to want to be a free, dignified, and independent people. Tamaku. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sompisi. You have pretty much touched on everything that I hoped you would touch on in your presentation, and mentioning how the Western forms of knowledge have this tendency to want to divorce us from our own communities, and I think it's something that's inherently part of the system of Western education, and just greater just Western thought as a whole. Now, the question I'm struggling with, I've always struggled with, is around the liminality of Black people, more particularly those of us who have gotten that Western education. I mean, Ubabu Sobukwe was liminal in the sense, even in his spirituality, because he's, as you rightfully mentioned, was a local preacher of the Methodist Church. He served the Methodist Church for a very long time. He's a boy of Hilltown. So he comes from traditions and decades of thinking and being drummed into Western thinking, firstly. And the issue with that is that with those years is that part of it becomes a part of you. You identify yourself as a Methodist. You identify yourself as a graduate. You identify yourself as these ways in which Western education makes you to identify yourself. But also you are fully aware. What we know with Babu Sobukwe's consciousness is that he was fully aware of his Blackness. And he was fully aware of the oppressive nature of these systems, be it within the church, within the school, within the university. He kept on coming across this very same oppression, which was based on his race. So the struggle I have is how does a Black person remain and how does a Black person remain conscious of who they are, in spite of the overwhelming mechanisms and machinery that are being drummed, and the machinery has now grown from what it was in Sobukwe's days. So how does that the machinery has now grown to be all that much more encompassing, because it leaves nothing to chance? So how do you become a cognitive rebel when every part of your life is drilled in such a way that you cannot be a rebel?
Yeah. Okay. It's a. I've also been struggling with the same question for years, right? I've been struggling with the same question for years because it's a very complex question you're asking, which has a number of variables to it. And one of the things I usually say when I have to respond to a question like the one you're asking is that if you are aware, right, of the existence of oppression or imperialism, right? So it may also imply that one of the things that you are aware of is that imperialism or oppression manifests itself as a totality, as a system, right? And so the fact that you understand your individual oppression, right, must not make you understand or think that this is a individualized struggle. And you did not say that, but I'm just making this point that it's not an individualist struggle. So you must understand that your oppression is the result of a system, right? And that if you are to attain your freedom or liberation, whether as an individual or as a group, the system that is responsible for your state of oppression and other forms of denigration, that system has to be dismantled, that system has to collapse. And so what you must understand, the position you occupy is the position of a slave, albeit a sophisticated one, right? So your certificates, your graduation gowns, your bank balance does not necessarily mean you're not a slave in the context of how oppression presents itself as a totality. And if you understand that, you will then understand that as a slave, you only have one reason for existence then as a slave, which is fighting for your liberation. You know, because if your existential reality is that of a slave, the logical thing to do is for you to live to attain your liberation. But in the process of attaining your liberation, you will also define what liberation means to you. And I usually say as an attempt that some of the basic criteria, right, to come to the conclusion that we have attained liberation or freedom would be some of the following: that one, as African people or as an oppressed people, we have developed the capacity to produce our own food. One. Two, we have developed the capacity to educate ourselves, because at the moment we are being educated by other people. We send our children to other people to educate them. And then three, we have the capacity, right, to protect ourselves against any external threat. As things stand now, we call ourselves natives in South Africa or Africa, but the people who are not natives can attack us at any time. We get slapped. We complain about foreigners and invaders being racist to us because we have not developed to the level where we understand that we are the natives, but we are the ones who continue to complain. So the long and short of it is that we must understand that there's no other way we can live our lives, having made those observations that you've made, but to live our lives as people who are involved in resistance, but not individual resistance, but group resistance. Because as individuals, we have got limitations, and we will not be able to dismantle the system as individuals. So the solution is revolution.
Since you're there, what do they weigh, about 60 grams these days? So you can see how it is.
The solution is revolution. That is a very catchy, very catchy phrase. But it is also a very scary one, if I'm hearing you correctly, because revolution comes with bloodshed, and revolution comes at a cost. I mean, we in South Africa, we have a negotiated settlement. And even that negotiated settlement did not come blood-free. It came as part of a compromise of realizing that there's been blood being shed on both sides of the spectrum. And so it's challenging to us indeed. It's highly challenging to us to be asked to step up to the mantle of revolution, and accept that a revolution will come at a huge cost, and be willing to make that sacrifice and be willing to make that cost. Yeah. I've been looking at the conversation on Facebook, and seemingly there are not much questions, but just words of affirmation saying that conversations are quite clear. Sonobile Ngwali mentioning that ISOMPC is clear, and everyone just kind of mentioning how these conversations are necessary. And so it doesn't seem like there's much questions from the participants on the Facebook page. Now, I would like to then, before we close today, I would like to give you, I'll start with Petani. I'll just give you 2 minutes to kind of give us a nutshell of how you understand the legacy of Sobukwe for our dispensation in today's South Africa. Petani, over to you, sir. And then after that, I'll ask you, Sompisi, to just close off with your thoughts as well.
Really difficult to accurately get over the board from that situation.
Petani, are you there?
Last year, season.
It seems like we cannot get to Petani. Can I ask then about some piece that you give us your sort of the one parting shot that you think summarizes the being and the legacy that is Ubauhlati as we know it.
Yes, yeah. Thanks again, Son of the Land. It is important for us to understand, right? He may have been called prof, and he was a lay preacher, he was a thinker, he was a writer. He may have been all of those things. But in my view, first and foremost, he was an African revolutionary. First and foremost, he was an African revolutionary. And if that is the understanding, my message is all those who think they are deserving of any association with Ubabu Mangaliso Sobukwe will know that in the context of today, they have only one obligation, and that is to intensify the African revolution, central to it being the return of the land to the African people by any means necessary. Kamako.
Of course. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It has been quite a fascinating conversation. It has been quite the enlightening conversation that we've had. But we must remember that we can never in any way compress the life of a giant such as this one into an hour's conversation. There are strands of conversations that will always be left hanging. There are strands of it. It will never be a complete conversation. But what we can appreciate is the fact that we have gotten a very solid platform from which to think of ourselves and think and understand of our situation. And we've gotten a very solid platform. We've inherited a very solid heritage. And I say this also being of Methodist descent as well. I say this being considering myself a thinker that we have got, probably we've got the best pattern to emulate within Southern Africa. And so such questions and conversations will always need for us to continually reflect on, grapple upon, and see how do we educate ourselves upon, how do we do the necessary research to get that cognitive liberation that Sompisi was talking about? How do we understand the land question in relation to what Petani was saying? And how do we understand that as the core of what is shaping South Africa, the South Africa that we see today? And on that note, I would like to thank every one of us who has joined us. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you very much. Goodbye.